Thank you to everybody who's attending today. We really appreciate you attending these events, and we're pleased to announce again and just keep reminding you that this is our 25th year celebration this year. So we'll be doing a lot of different events and things over the next few months, and working through. We laugh that we're going to declare victory all year long here, and make it a full year-long celebration and stuff. This is going to be our last Aspire event that we have this spring, but we'll step back in the fall and do 2 or 3 more. We're actually talking to some different groups here in Dallas about bringing other topics. As those of you who've been around us a little bit know that we try and bring you things that are different, that they're things that we think you'd like to be exposed to. Today's topic is particularly relevant to that, and I'll get into that in just a minute. Couple things that are in front of you. We have a CP evaluation form, so if you'd like to have continuing professional ed credit and stuff, we're more than glad to try and sign off and get you the form and stuff for the time. We also have speaker evaluation forms and stuff there for you if you'll fill those out. We're also looking for suggestions on topics. People continue to feed those to us so that we can look and see what we can do. And then Paul, our speaker today, has provided you with a brochure, and then we'll get you a copy of the halftime book and stuff today as you're departing out the door and stuff. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul McGinnis to you today. He's spent his 20-year career in the nonprofit world, running his own business, and then most recently as Vice President of Marketing for the fastest growing division at Ecolab, which was a Fortune 250 company based in St. Paul, Minnesota. His background also includes marketing, sales, operations, and HR. He's fixed struggling departments as well as starting new divisions. He has a knack for creative leadership focused on bringing out the best in people. He has a love for work, humor, honesty, life, and charisma, and inspiring people to move. He's from Durango, Colorado. He grew up hating the Dallas Cowboys since they beat his Denver Broncos in the first Super Bowl appearance in '78. And since then he moved to Arlington. He got right up next to the stadium so he could get close. And he's been helping Jerry, fund the new Dallas Cowboy Stadium with all of his tax dollars from Arlington. He and his wife Marilyn have celebrated 24 years of marriage in 5 days recently, and they are now truly empty nesters. His son Drew's getting a PhD at the University of California, and Jenica has finished her freshman year at UT Arlington. He enjoys teaching, speaking, tennis, volleyball, and photography. He now serves as an executive coach and lead facilitator for the Halftime Insitute, an organization started by Bob Buford in 1998, and he leads their marketing efforts. The reason we asked them to come today was because we have noticed some of us are getting a little gray-headed, and that it's a point in time, especially as you become empty nesters and as you get to some point in your life, you go, what do I want to do? And you suddenly wake up and realize you've got less years left on this world than you have behind you, which is kind of a unique moment when that hits you. And we think that we see a lot of baby boomers that are walking into our offices that own companies, that are at a point in their career that they're trying to figure out, what do I do next and how do I spend my time? And that's part of what he's going to talk about today, is a biblical thought process as to how you approach this and how you think through some of these things and what some of those options are. We were discussing before he started this morning that with technology and all the things going on, you truly can run your career for probably a longer period of time if you're healthy and be able to travel, do things, work on projects, do mission trips, all these kinds of things, and make it work on parallel tracks. And he's going to expose you to some of those thoughts this morning and other things to think about. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Good morning. So think for a minute, what one word comes to your mind if you were to describe American culture today? Would it be apathy? Would it be perseverance, opportunistic? Would it be too many regulations? Not enough regulations? I mean, there's a lot of words that could describe our American culture, but I want to propose one word that I think describes our culture perfectly. And it's a word that you've heard, you've used, you could correctly spell in elementary school. As a marketer, which is my background, I try to use it in such a way that I can creatively and persuasively use it in such a way to persuade people like you to buy something you don't have. I believe it drives most of our crime, suicides, unhappiness. However, and I think the biggest allies to this are Hollywood, money, the news media. However, this word also can drive incredible achievement. It can create monumental change. It can actually make somebody perform at their best. In fact, I've seen it consume somebody where they were doing things that they had no idea they were capable of, good and bad. Webster defines it as a restless desire or craving for something one does not have. This 10-letter word that I'm talking about is discontent. So think about it for a minute. Your microwave's not fast enough. You never look good enough. Our TVs aren't big enough. We're never revered enough. We're not smart enough. We're never comfortable enough. We're never rich enough. And we very rarely say enough is enough. Discontent is all around us. And so I want to ask you, even though it's early, why do you think, if you believe that discontent is an adjective that you could describe our American culture, not you, of course, it doesn't describe you, it describes your hypothetical friends, why do you think we have this problem with discontent? What do you think drives that? There's a lot of things, but what are some things that come to your mind?
Measuring our outsides and comparing to our insides to everybody else's outsides.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Comparing ourselves to others. What else? Yeah.
You marketing guys create a lot of it.
Us marketing guys, absolutely. I knew that was coming. What else? What else drives discontent?
Urge of leadership.
I'm sorry?
Urge of leadership.
The urge of leadership, and what did you say?
Lack of self-worth.
Lack of self-worth, absolutely.
Lack of purpose in our life.
Lack of purpose. You guys are pretty good for not being discontent, but you have close friends that are, so that's really good. Those are great examples. So discontent is this huge issue, and there's a lot of things that create discontent, all the things you said. Some of the ones I want to key in on are talk shows. Do you think they create discontent? Their topics, their guests, maybe their lack of information or the statistics they find to make their point or whatever. Talk shows is one. I know magazines don't create any discontent whatsoever. When you're going through the checkout line, I mean, 100 perfect outfits, like perfect. I mean, I have good outfits, but perfect? I mean, I got to figure out what this is. Or, over here, look cute every day. I mean, I might look cute 3 of the 7 days a week, but every day I got to read this, Or look, the number one thing that makes sex very, very good, 2 varies. I may be only at 1 vary. I got to figure out what this number one thing. I mean, there is discontent everywhere. And not only that, TV and commercials really do a good job, to your point, of marketers creating discontent. So I actually want to show these commercials. This first one is the PC versus Mac. You might have remembered these series of commercials. They actually did about 60 of them. Not all of them went to the air. You can go to YouTube and see the rest. This is one that obviously creates discontent to those of us that use Windows. And then after that, we'll show you a Kia one. But Ryan, if we can do the PC versus Mac, that would be great.
Hello, I'm a Mac, and I have a PC. Hey, Mac, did you hear the good news? Windows 7 is out, and it's not going to have any of the problems my last operating system had. Trust me. I feel like I've heard this before, PC. What? Windows Vista's here, and it's not going to have any of the problems that Windows XP had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows ME had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows 98 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 95 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 2 had. Trust me. This time it's going to be different. Trust me.
I am now a Mac believer, so I've been converted, and I know Ryan's laughing, right? IT humor. The next one is a Kia commercial, and this will really get you going in the morning. This actually won several awards, and this was when Kia came out with their Soul, the Kia Soul, and they called it This or That. Are you going to have this, or are you going to have that? So let's show that as well. Okay, there we go. I had to get the end part there. So our world is soaked with messages creating discontent. If discontent creeps in by just giving you a slight pause, and it can be 2 seconds long, it can be a long period of time, it can be very subtle, it can be very blatant, but either way, it's incredibly forceful. And it causes you to ask questions you've never asked before and consider answers that you've never, ever thought possible, good or bad. It creates insecurity and pride, which leads to all kinds of things. It can lead to complaining and gossip, and then move to materialism, to move to unethical practices, depression, alcoholism, crime. It's the whole gamut that discontent can create. And so it's just an idea of, if I can just get you to pause for a second. I know for me in 8th grade, I wasn't very self-aware at that point in my life. And I remember somebody came up and told me I was skinny. And I'd never even looked at myself in that way. And I went home and I basically got undressed and looked in my mirror and I go, oh my gosh, I am skinny. That created discontent. And then all of a sudden I start comparing myself, and it just toppled over itself for many years. You know, I was 5 foot and 79 pounds. I was skinny in 8th grade. And so it's just this pause that creates this discontent, and it happens all the time. And so my pause, I want to tell a little bit about my story because it's an interesting one. I've always battled episodes of discontent, not y'all, but me. But in June 2011, it kind of hit a whole nother level for me. And it wasn't like on June 11th at 2 p.m. this switch flipped and I became discontent. It had been building for about 3 years. And for me, it was just 3 years of crappiness. I mean, that's really the only way to say it. It started, my dad was killed in a car accident in Mobile, Alabama. My mom was with him. She was in ICU for 60 days, had some touch-and-go moments, and that makes you think, right? I mean, many of us have been through tragedies like that. And then my mother-in-law died in her sleep not long after that, suddenly. Our daughter had a cancer scare at 10 years old. Our son went to a prestigious college, got kicked out for marijuana. That was a fun time. A 41-year-old friend of ours died of cancer. I mean, it was just all this stuff packed in 3 years. And you asked a lot of questions during that time, especially from a Christian worldview. You're asking why, where was God, those kind of things, and those were definitely on my mind. But 2 questions that kept coming to my mind over and over again was, what's my purpose? Because of the deaths that were surrounding that 3-year period, I was just like, life is short. What's my purpose? And not necessarily at a huge macro level, Paul McGinnis, what's his purpose? What am I meant to do with my skills and abilities and experience? And then the other thing was, am I making a difference? Am I making a difference? And it was just this kind of smoldering discontent. My coach called it smoldering discontent, which I thought was a great phrase, that just gnawed at my soul. And at the time, I was vice president of marketing for Ecolab in their food safety division in Las Colinas. Great company. I had 4 different teams. We were doing a lot of creative things and doing a lot in the whole food safety restaurant industry and things. And I loved what I did, but then as I kind of went through this phase, it just became less and less important. And launching a new product or publishing a new magazine or whatever we were doing at the time just didn't have the same sex appeal. It just wasn't as energizing anymore. And it really bothered me because I thought something must be wrong. Here I have a great job, I have a corner office, I have stock options, I have all these things that if I went and complained to you, you'd be like, buck up, you know? And so then you tend to isolate, because I sure don't want to say those things because then you're viewed as just somebody that's not grateful. And so these things, I just had these coals kind of in my soul that all these events would kind of just fan the flame and I'd get little flames. And so I was just really struggling during this time. And again, just going, wait, I should be really happy and I'm not. And I had more money than meaning. And that's really the definition of halftime, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so during this phase, I got a call from a private equity firm in downtown Dallas. And I wasn't seeking a job. I hadn't put my resume out, nothing. And I got this call. And they said, hey, we bought a company. It's in the food industry in Houston. We'd like you to come interview to run it. You'll get part ownership. We'll flip it in 3 to 5 years. I mean, it's a great opportunity. So I said, you know, maybe I just need a change of scenery. Maybe I just need something different, and that will create joy in my life. And so I went and interviewed and had 3 hours worth of interviews with all the partners. It went great. I get in my car, I'm driving back to Arlington, and it just hit me. I don't want to be president of a company. You think I'd have figured that out before I went and interviewed. But it just hit me. I don't want to do this. And that was a real huge conundrum for me because that's what I'd been working for so long. So all of a sudden, I don't want to do this. And then at Ecolab, I'm in line in HR as succeeding to be general manager of the food safety division. I'm like, 80% of that job I'll hate. And I knew I'd have to even put in more hours than what I'm doing now. And if I go to a public company, and many of you know how that is and the pressures of that, I go to this private equity firm, it's going to be just as much pressure flipping something. And I was like, I just don't know if I want to do that. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? This is what I've been working for. I mean, this is a great opportunity. And again, I couldn't share that with a lot of people because they're like, hey, stupid, shut up. And so I just began to just really kind of saying, God, I mean, it just brought me to my knees. I said, God, if you don't want me to do this, I'm completely confused. And so I just began to pray over the next couple of weeks. And what really came to me very clearly, I wish I could say it was audible or written on the wall or something. I always prayed for that. That's never happened. But it just really, he just impressed upon me that you need to wrap your mind around leaving Ecolab. Now, I don't know about you, but for a type A achiever, driven, that's so ambiguous, I don't even know what to do with that. You need to leave July 11th, or you need to wait until your kids are done with college or something. This is too ambiguous. What does this mean? So typically, like a typical guy, within about an hour, I said, all right, God, I've wrapped my mind around it, now what? And I really envision him laughing, just laughing hysterically at me, going, oh boy, you don't know the journey you're about to go on. And so I just began to really pray through, and my wife was on this journey with me, and she fortunately wasn't freaked out by this whole confusing period of time in my life. And the first thing we really felt we needed to do was to adjust financially. My wife is a school teacher in Arlington, and they make really good money as school teachers in Arlington. And so I just had this sneaky suspicion that God was going to call me to either a nonprofit that didn't pay quite as well as what I was getting paid, or I would be writing letters to people like you saying, would you support me every month? I mean, I just had this feeling it was going to be that. I didn't know, but I just had this feeling. So we began to adjust financially. And we never lived high on the hog, but obviously we lived on my salary quite a bit. And so we just began to adjust. And in 6 months, we were living on my wife's salary and putting my salary in savings. We got rid of TV, we lowered our insurance premiums, we refinanced our house, all kinds of things. Instead of going and buying a new car, my 10-year-old car was okay, those kind of things. And so we just adjusted, and so during that time, I applied for a doctorate at UTA in management. I thought maybe I want to teach, I love teaching. And so all this is going on in January of 2012. I'm like, all right, God, I adjusted financially, now what? Well then, after the financial adjustment, it was identity. And I would have much rather gone back to financial adjustment, let me tell you. That was much easier than identity. And he just really got the sandpaper out on me and began to think, your identity is in your job, and it's not in me. And at first I was like, no, it's not. I could leave this thing tomorrow. But then you start digging a little deeper. I loved telling people my title. I loved having the company car. I loved the golden handcuffs that had been firmly attached 3 or 4 years before that. I loved talking to somebody over coffee about our stock options. It was just pride, and my identity was in it. And he said, no, your identity needs to be in me. And I have not arrived at my identity in God, so don't hear that. But from January till April was this time for me where just incredible growth, where I really had to detach my identity from what I did to who I was in Christ. And on April 15th, I remember it like it was yesterday. It's 2012. April 15th in 2012 was a Sunday. Some of you know that because you're sick like that and you do taxes, and so you had an extra day. You know who you are. It's 10:30 at night. Marianne, my wife, is asleep next to me, and I'm praying through it like I've been doing, and it was as clear as God has ever spoken to me. He said, you need to leave Ecolab and you need to leave tomorrow. And I had the same reaction about half of you had. Come again? What is this exactly? And it was overwhelming. And so I wake up Marianne, I go, hey, just so you know, I really feel like God's telling me to leave Ecolab tomorrow. She goes, great. And she turns back over to go to sleep. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. You don't understand it. And I tap her again. And she's like, what? Why are you hesitant? And I go, well, I thought I was going to leave to go teach or go get my doctorate, and that sounds really cool. Or I was going to go lead a nonprofit, or I was going to do something amazing, which again is an identity issue, but that's what I thought. And I said, I'm leaving because God told me to leave. And I said, you don't understand Ecolab's culture. I will be ridiculed for this. And she looked at me, and I don't know if any of you men can attest to this. It's like the Holy Spirit came out of my wife's voice. Many times the Holy Spirit sounds like my wife's voice. And so this was one of those moments, 11 o'clock at night on April 15th, and she looks at me and she goes, so let me get this straight. It's the truth, isn't it? Yes. And she goes, when have you ever cared what people thought, especially when it came to obeying God? And then the third thing she said was, and what an incredible testimony to the people at Ecolab. You're worried about their ridicule. What an incredible testimony. And then she turned over and went back to bed. Just let me simmer on that. I didn't sleep all night. I'm thinking about what she said, which was absolutely true. And then I'm reminding God of all the things I'm sure he forgot. Healthcare. This was all when Obamacare was all over the place. You know, do you know I have unvested stock options? I mean, the golden handcuffs have just been put on. You know, all this stuff about what am I going to do? And again, I feel like he just laughed and said, you know, I got this. And so by 6:30 in the morning, if I wouldn't have gone in and quit, I think I'd have had to go to the hospital. It was physically overwhelming. And so I called my boss and said, hey, we need to get together for lunch. He just thought it was a one-on-one. We go to lunch, and he starts talking about a project. I go, Scott, I need to stop you. I said, I'm leaving Ecolab. He's like, what? He goes, who got you? And I said, well, nobody. And then I went and told him the same story I just told you guys. And he's not a believer, and his jaw was on the table, and he was pissed. He was really, really upset. And he's like, how stupid are you? He didn't hold any punches, you know. And he's like, why in the world would God tell you to leave? You have a kid that's in college. You have a kid going to college in 2 years. You have he went through the whole, mainly financial, the whole thing. He goes, we're going to have the biggest bonus year ever. We're the fastest growing division. We're going to be at the 140 payout. You have to be employed on 12/31. This is April. What are you thinking? I went through the whole thing and I said, Scott, there's not one thing I haven't thought of. All I can tell you is God's always been faithful. I have no idea what he has planned, but I'm confident he's going to be faithful. And somebody had told me right before I did this, they said, you need to be aware. You're going to have a lot of God conversations. I said, what do you mean? They said, when somebody at your level that they know is smart and successful but does something really stupid, they can't rectify that in their minds, and they're going to ask you about it. You just need to be prepared for that. And then I gave a 6-week notice, and in that 6 weeks, I had more than 50 conversations, God conversations. It was absolutely unbelievable. Unfortunately, far more than I ever had in the 10 years I was at Ecolab. I had people come in my office going, what do you mean you heard God's voice? Freak, you know? And then the identity thing was very apparent of why God wanted me to work on my identity, because the memo went out from HR, and you guys know what these memos are like. Since I had no plans of what I was going to do, it's Paul McGinnis is leaving Ecolab to explore other career opportunities. That means you got your butt fired, right? So all these people are calling me going, what did you do? Was it sexual harassment? You know, did you embezzle money? All these things. I'm like, no. And so I got to tell them. So anyways, incredible conversations during that time. I had a company car. They didn't even tell me. They come and got with a tow truck. So then all my neighbors are thinking I got repossessed. I mean, all these things that God's just smiling, going, see why I wanted you to work on your identity? You know, just see. And so this 6 weeks was incredible. And during this 6 weeks, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I'm headed into this midlife sabbatical. And I go to a Sweet 16 party with my daughter. It was one of her friends. And there was about 50 or 60 people there. And there was a guy that I hadn't seen in a couple years. We were good friends a long time ago. And he said, how's Ecolab? And he kind of asked me at the wrong time. I didn't emotionally break down, but I just kind of spewed on him and go, I have no idea. I'm leaving. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I've always had a plan for my life. I'm confused. I'm frustrated. I feel like a schizophrenic. And he's just kind of going, well, I was just being courteous, you know. And then he started laughing. And he said, Paul, he goes, that's exactly where I was 4 years ago. He goes, you need to check out the Halftime Insitute. I'd never heard of the Halftime Insitute, never heard of Bob Buford, never heard of the book Halftime. So I went to the website that night, and for the next 4 hours, I watched every video, I read every blog, I did everything, and it's like, this is like reading my email. I mean, this is exactly where I am. And so I filled out a form and I said, I want to enroll. They have a year-long program. And I left Ecolab May 31st, and I was at the Halftime Insitute on June 4th. And it was funny, how the program works is it's a year-long program and you're with a cohort of peers that are in the same season of life. We cater to very successful marketplace leaders. And so I have 11 other people in my group. The guy next to me is Mike Ullman, CEO of JCPenney. The guy over here is an Accenture partner, and I'm a VP of marketing. I'm going, okay, I'm a little out of place here. And then 11 other people as well. But within 30 minutes, all titles are stripped because we were all completely lost of what we wanted to do. This was Mike Ullman's first stint with JCPenney when he retired. And the Apple guy came in, and now, obviously he's back. But this was right after he had retired the first time. And so I'm with these guys, and Bob Buford's sitting next to me. And so we're going around introducing ourselves, and Bob can tend to ramble. Some of you might know Bob. He can he makes a point. It just might be like this to get there. And he said, he introduced himself, and he said, and one of my principles that I believe in is when you're hanging on to one vine, look for the next. And then they said, now, Paul, why don't you introduce yourself? And I go, well, I just let go of my vine. I am in midair. And I said, I'm sorry, Bob, I violated one of your principles, but I am looking for the next vine, and I'm falling, at the moment. And so I went through this, and you go through it with a cohort of peers, and then you get assigned an executive coach for a year. And what they've found over the last 15 years is this season of halftime is especially with boomers. But Bob went through this season of halftime where he had more money than meaning. He craved more joy, impact, and balance, but he just wasn't getting it from his business. And Bob, if you guys know, and you guys will get the book at the end of this, and you can read it if you want to. He was a TV guy, so he was in the 70s and 80s, kind of got into the cable industry and at the incredible growth, and got to this point when he was 40 that he goes, I just don't know, this isn't what it's all about. Lost his son to a tragic accident when his son was 21. And so his mentor was Peter Drucker, father of modern management, and he would meet with him on a regular basis. And Peter said these words. He said, Bob, you need to know there's a lot of universities for the first half of life, but there's no universities for the second half of life. And Peter Drucker was a thinker and a futurist, and he said it's going to be a huge deal over the next 50 years because people are going to have 30, 40 bonus years that they didn't have 50 years ago because of health, technology, all kinds of stuff, bionic knees and shoulder replacements and all these things. And he goes, it's going to be a totally different thing when people hit 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, and they know that they have 20 years left of substantial production. And so Bob, he said, you ought to write a book about this. So he wrote Halftime in 1995. It's been 20 years this year. And he said, I talked to him the other day because we're working on the 20th commemorative edition, and he said, I was going to be happy if we sold 10,000 copies. Well, it became a bestseller. So he, of course, like a lot of authors, went around and spoke, and it got so popular, he said, I got to start an organization that will help men and women transition through this season of halftime because most people fail when they go it alone. They just kind of shove it down like I started to do, going, I got to be happy. I mean, look at this. I'm making good money, all this. I'm just going to shove it down and I'm going to deal with it. And that wasn't the case. And so I worked with a coach for a year, and I learned a billion things. But there's 3 lessons I wanted to share with you that I learned. One is I really learned we were created with a soul thirst for God. Now, for those of you that are Christians, that you're like, well, duh. And that was kind of my thing as well. But I learned it at a whole nother level, that there had been so many things that I had put in place of that yearning, that quest for purpose and significance, and tried to fill it with power or status or accumulation or whatever, relationships, anything. I coach people every day that are in this boat that they are filling it with anything they can find other than God. And I just learned that it's not going to work. And what I learned and how I depicted it was, I believe there's believers and there's Christ followers. And a believer, if they die today, is going to go to heaven. They believe in the redemption of Christ and His grace, and that they can't do anything or perform and do enough to get to heaven. And I believe that. But do you know there's believers that you know, and there's Christ followers you know? And there's a difference in those two. And you begin thinking, if you think of a Christ follower right now, there's probably some characteristics that come out that typical believers. And what's bad is when I talk to people, they believe about 80% of Christians are on the believer. That's where the hypocrisy of the church and all those things that you hear non-believers talk about. And so I said, what's the difference in a Christ follower and a believer? Well, it's really your heart. And if you really want to change your heart, you need to think differently. And this, for me, was an epiphany. And it's really Romans 12, 1 and 2, but for me, it was brand new. And I remember this quote I read during this thing from Dr. Dan Gilbert at Harvard. He said, "The heart goes where the head takes it, and neither cares much about the whereabouts of the feet." And it reminded me of Romans 12, 1 and 2, and this is from the Message. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. So for me, at halftime, they talk about it's a head journey and a heart journey. Most people come to the program going, what do I want to do next? Especially working with successful marketplace leaders, we're doers, we're performers. But the question also is, who do you need to become in order to do what God's calling you to you next? And so it's a head and a heart journey, and this was definitely a heart journey for me. The second thing was God uniquely shaped us with gifts and experiences that can fuel our second half. I love the metaphor of halftime. Maybe because I'm a sports guy, but you know, whether it's an NBA halftime or an NFL game, you come into halftime and first of all, you rest. And that's key because we're not very good at resting. But you rest. And what do you do then? The coach, you guys talk about, what did you do in the first half that worked? What did you do that didn't work? What do we need to adjust to make the second half a lot better than the first half? And that's really what the whole metaphor of halftime is it's a pause to look back at your first half and see what you can learn to make the second half even better. And no, it's not necessarily chronological. Who was I talking to said, Jay, I'm in the fourth quarter. Okay, you could be in the fourth. We don't know, right? I could be in the fourth quarter. I could have 12 seconds left. I don't know. But the metaphor of halftime is just so powerful. And one of the things they do at halftime is they talk about this model called the 3 C's. And the first C, and these are those 3 circles on your handout. The first C is your core. Is talking about who are you at your core. Now, when I first heard this with my coach, I kind of rolled my eyes. Oh, here we go. I'm going to take a Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment or something. I've had so many performance appraisals. I know what I'm good at. I know what I suck at. You know, what am I going to do? But it was combining those strengths with your passions. And that was a new thing for me. What was I passionate about? And I don't know about you, but I turned my dreamer off years ago. I don't know how. Remember when we were kids? We had no problem. I had an imaginary friend, but it was a camel. That's pretty creative. A 2-humped camel named Shabubu, you know? But somehow some might say craziness, but creativity left me, right, when you get in the world or whatever, and I stopped dreaming for whatever reason. And so this was a really good exercise. What are you passionate about? What makes you cry? What makes you angry? When you look at the Wall Street Journal or USA Today or whatever, what just you go to and you're mad or you're sad or whatever. You see inner city poverty and it speaks at your heart or whatever. So my coach kind of took me through this process of what that looked like. And then the second C was capacity, and you can't see it all. It's margin in your time, money, and spiritual capacity. And it's time, if you're going to find out who you are and what you want to do, you got to have time to do it. So you have to have some margin from a time perspective. And financial margin doesn't mean wealthy and independently wealthy for the rest of your life, which is what Bob Buford was when you read his books. Everybody thinks that that's the case. It's just simply financial margin. My coach said, you can't be cash flow negative and live out your calling. So just make sure you have financial margin. Make sure you're not in debt. You know, make sure you have that. And then spiritual overflow. Make sure you have margin in your life. If you're going to be asked to love others, you better fully understand God's love, and then it overflows out of your heart. And it goes a lot deeper than that, but that's what we'll talk about. And then the third C was context. If you find out who you are and you have the capacity to go out, what's it going to look like? Are you going to stay right where you are? A lot of people, because they read Bob's book and he left the television industry and started a couple nonprofits, that if you come to the Halftime Insitute, you got to go quit what you're doing and go start something in Rwanda. And that couldn't be further from the truth. God may call you to do that. But about 50 to 60% of the people that come through our program stay in the platform they actually are right then when they start. And we had a guy named Tony that he had a bunch of car dealerships in the Raleigh-Durham area, and he came going, I know God's going to tell me to sell those, and I'm going to go do something for him. And by the time he went through all of this, he had a knack for making money. He was a really good businessman. So he started a We Care program in his car dealerships, first aimed at helping and ministering to his own employees. And then they said, how can we be Jesus to the 3 mile radius around each of our car dealerships? Totally changed his paradigm through the coaching. So it could be stay, it could be join like I did. I left Ecolab, joined the Halftime Institute. Could be start something or a mixture of all three of those. And then not only that, what's your role in that organization? You ever been in a role that doesn't fit? You know, in a role you did that was just a perfect fit for you. So that was another lesson is, you know, where's my sweet spot? And working with a coach, I identified 3 or 4 areas that God has uniquely shaped me. And I wanted to make sure I was plugged into those things somehow in some way that would bring me joy. Then lessons learned. The third one, it's never too late. This was a big one for me. It's real common when you get to this halftime point and you look back, is you look back with regret. I've wasted my life. You know, like I had 50 conversations about God in 6 weeks at Ecolab, and I didn't have any at 10, you know, for 10 years, or not many, for 10 years. You know, the Amtrak wreck that just happened, the 8th guy they found I worked with at Ecolab. I never shared Christ with them. So it's real easy to play that, to get into that guilt, and there's a difference in that guilt and that conviction, but it's really easy to do that. And I had to get to a point where I said, it's not too late, it's never too late. And I found some examples. You know, Colonel Sanders started KFC at age 65? I mean, that's amazing. Julia Child wrote The Art of Mastering the Art of French Cooking at age 49. Mother Teresa started the Missionaries of Charity at age 40, won a Nobel Peace Prize at 69. Gandhi's Salt March was when he was 61 years old. Ray Kroc started McDonald's at age 52. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote Little House on the Prairie series at age 65. Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa at 75. I mean, there is a lot that goes on in the second half of life. Peter Drucker said his best book, he always said his best book was his next book, but his best book was, most of them came after age 50. And so it's never too late. And I had to really realize that that's really key, that I'm just getting started, that God has given me experiences and tragedy and joy and relationships and failures and everything that can really build a platform and a foundation for a significant second half. So I want to stop here, and I want to ask you if you have any questions. And I got some other stuff we'll finish up on. But it can be, as you can see, I'm fairly authentic. So it can be about my own story or emotion through it. It can be about the Halftime Institute or anything I might have said. But I just want to give you the opportunity to ask some questions, and then we can finish up after that. Yes?
Expand a little bit on the Halftime Institute. I mean, how big is it, and what's your scope? And
Yeah. I'll pass out too, at the end of this, maybe, or maybe with the book, we can pass out the brochure that has information on it. But our scope is we teach, coach, and connect marketplace leaders to basically find a second half of significance. And so we specifically work with successful marketplace leaders. So typically they're executive, entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, professionals in that realm. We have 2 programs. They're both a year long. We have a members program, and it is, you start with a launch event, like I said, with a cohort of typically 8 to 12. We don't go bigger than that. It's real important that you do this with others, and we've found that over the last 15 years that's important. You get assigned a coach, and then you meet with your cohort over the phone every month, just to kind of, we call it celebrate and commiserate with your cohort, because you really get to know each other in the 2 days. Then we have a fellows program. A fellows program, what we found is the example of my cohort. I'm sitting next to the CEO of JCPenney. Well, Mike Ullman is one of the most humble, generous guys you've ever met, but I'm not his peer. He's the CEO of JCPenney. And what we found is when we got that level, somebody at the top of the corporate ladder, they didn't feel like they were in a group of like-minded peers, and that's really important. And so we started a fellows program for people that are at the top of the career ladder or just hopped off. Maybe they sold their business, maybe they just retired, and that's unique. They get together 4 times a year, face-to-face. There's something with couples that happens within that group. They get exposed to leading thinkers. They meet with Jim Collins, author of Good to Great, Ken Blanchard, a lot of Rich Stearns at World Vision. We have adjunct faculty all over the world that they meet with. So those are the 2 main programs, all with coaching. And we're a staff, we have 31 coaches around the world. The staff here in Dallas, we're in Uptown Dallas, is 10 full-time. We serve, like right now, we're about 300 clients. So 250, 300 clients at any given time. We kick off a cohort usually every other month. So, what other questions? I know there's a couple that you're like, yes?
For a person that is not a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
then it cannot belong to halftime?
No. Most of our clients are Christians. But I'm actually coaching a lawyer out of Austin that's not, and he goes, well, tell me how Christian this is going to be. And I said, well, you need to know, it's biblically based. I mean, that's what we believe, and we are. But, you know, we're not going to memorize Scripture, you know, if that's what you want, or, you know. And he goes, well, I can respect that, so I think I'm going to come. So he went to the launch event, and I wasn't facilitating that launch event. And so after that, our next coaching session, I said, what's your biggest takeaway from the launch event? He goes, I got to figure out this God thing. And so part of his journey is figuring out if God is for real. And so he's reading 2 faith books a month, and we're talking about him and going through it. He's created a personal board of directors, and 3 of them are Christians, because he said, oh, I'm going to figure this out. And so anyways, no, but most are. Most are, but it's not, we don't say, sorry, you're not a Christian, you can't come, but we're very upfront that what we do is Christian-based, faith-based. What else? And again, it doesn't have to be all about the Halftime Institute. It can be anything, if I left out anything in my story. Yeah?
Before you get a member of a church, when you were going through these challenges in 2011.
Yeah, I was.
And were you part of a Bible study or men's group?
Yeah, I was. I was a teacher of a group. I taught at the same group. We were young marrieds at one time, and then we just kind of stayed together, and now they don't let us call us young marrieds anymore, because that's not what we are. And as a teacher, you have to kind of share. It's just natural to share what you're going on. So they kind of walked through it with me. So it was actually very encouraging. You know, I had a couple people saying, you're insane, and you obviously didn't hear God, but for the most part, it was supportive.
Where do you feel like you are in your journey?
Now? Yeah. You know, I've never had more joy than I've had in what I'm doing now. So 3 of the things that came out in my core exercises was coaching and mentoring. My coach did a really good job of, I've always been a coach, I just never called it that. He said, you're a coach in marketing clothes. I always really spent a lot of time developing my people, you know, trying to get them in the right role and the right fit. Well, that was that coach coming out in me naturally. So he said, you know, whether you get paid for it or not, coaching or mentoring, you really need, you know, that's something we need to do. The other thing was teaching and facilitating. I love speaking to groups and talking and facilitating. And then the third was leading something. And I didn't know what that was, but I've always just kind of naturally been leading something. And so the first thing was we do a lot of low-cost probes, and we just dip your toe into certain things to see what you want to do. And Bob talks about that in his book. And so I went to a coaches conference, and I went through some coaching classes just to see if it resonated, and sure enough, it did. So I started with Halftime as a coach. Most of the coaches are 1099 employees. And so I was a coach and got some clients and started working with them. And then I realized I can't coach all day, every day. That's actually not energizing. I love doing a few clients, but not every day. And so I said, I need to lead something. I wasn't leading anything. And actually, Halftime called me about a month later and said, we've never had a marketing person. We really need one, and that's your background. Would you like to do that? So this is really rare, but I'm actually the 3 areas. I'm actually facilitating launch events at the Halftime Institute. I'm coaching clients, and then I'm leading their marketing efforts. So that doesn't always work that way. But yeah, right now, it's just absolutely amazing. Making a lot less money, all that stuff, never been happier. It's absolutely amazing. Yes?
Can you describe in one sentence what your identity is?
Oh, wow. You actually wrote that down and worked on that question.
That was the tough part, but
Yeah.
First was, financial doesn't, what your identity.
Yeah, you know, there's this thing that meant a lot to me in my journey, and it's unfortunately it's a lot longer than one sentence. It's called Child of the King. It's written by a head of counseling at our church, and it just lists everything of who you are in Christ. It's absolutely unbelievable, and I literally read that every day for probably 60 days. And it just, and I could, you know, if we need to send it to you guys or something, we send it to people all the time, but it was just understanding that I'm redeemed and that there's nothing I can do to get for God to love me anymore. And again, it sounds trite, but it is such a whole nother level. And not that I don't have to remind myself on a regular basis of that, but it was really that. And that is so freeing. It's so incredibly freeing that I need to do my part. You know, there's a verse right here. This is Galatians 6, 4, and 5. I love this. Make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you've been given and sink yourself into it. I love that. So find out who you are and how God shaped you, and then don't just do it. Sink yourself into it. And then Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, figures out if you do that, you're going to be really good at it. Because you've made a careful exploration of who you are, and that's how God's wired you. You're going to be really good at it. So don't be impressed with yourself, because you're going to hear a lot of compliments. And then don't compare yourself to others, because it's what God's called you to do. I can't say, well, Greg does these Aspire events every month, and I don't do that. Well, that's because that's what Greg has been called to do. What I've been called to do is totally different. It says each of you must take responsibility for doing the creative best you can with your own life. And so it was both, to your question. It was understanding what I need to do and being a good steward of my time, talent, and treasure for sure. But then it was also saying God's got it, and I don't have to worry about it. Anything else?
When you look at your clients that you're working with right now, what percentage of them generally stay put with what they're doing and learn to find contentment there versus do a 180-degree change?
Yeah. I would say 50% stay right where they are. And that's a real myth at halftime, because Bob didn't do that, so they think, again, that they have to. But 50% say, wow, God's given me an incredible platform for a reason, and I need to use that. So it's just kind of a paradigm shift of maybe how they can use that business or something for discipleship or lots of different ways. And we have tons of examples of that. And then I'd say 30 to 40 may join another organization, maybe another marketplace organization, or it may be a nonprofit, and probably 10 start something. You know, you get those entrepreneurs that are coming through. They look to see if there's an organization that's doing what they're really passionate about, and if there is, they join it, and if not, they start their own. Yeah. So I got to leave you with 3 challenging questions, because I wouldn't, you know, I got to give you something to wrestle with. Maybe some of the stuff we've already talked about you're wrestling with, but this will really help you wrestle. What is your winning costing you? This is a really big question, and we asked this recently of a CEO of a company you all know, and he said this. He said, you know, sadly, I think it has cost me pretty much everything. I've lost the most wonderful woman you could be married to. I lost my daughter's respect. I pushed my body too hard and too long, and the stress finally caught up with me. Here I am out on this 3,000-acre ranch, and I have no close friends. I have thousands of acquaintances, but no real close friends. I have a huge pile of cash that frankly doesn't mean much to me. You probably deal with some of this in the wealth management area. So the first question to wrestle with is, what is winning costing you? Then the second is, what do you have that's priceless? And what are you doing to protect it? So many of the valuable things in our life we protect. Our businesses, our homes, our cars, our valuables, our investments. But what about the things that are priceless? Your marriage, your family, your kids, your relationship to God, your relationships in general. And then the third, if your life turned out perfectly, what would the elements be? Especially for you guys in this room, we have all kinds of metrics of success of our business. Very few of us have metrics of what a win looks like in our life. What would that be? And I encourage you to really think through these. These aren't questions you can answer in the next 5 minutes and I just give you a little bit of time. These are questions that kind of gnaw at you, which is good. And you need to know that if there's anything we can do to help, that's fine. This is not meant to be a sales pitch for the Halftime Insitute. It is more of my story and how I've journeyed through it. But you need to know that there is an organization behind the book that we've walked thousands of people through this. And what we've found is most people that walk through this confusing time by themselves fail. It's just too hard. It's too much. As a marketer, it's incredibly hard to find these people. It's been the most challenging marketing experience I've ever had, because when you're a successful person, you're not standing on the street corner saying, "I'm lost and confused, would you please come help me?" That's not too kosher, you know? And so it's really hard to find this group, and most of the time it's through stuff like this, and it's handing out the book, and it's a friend or coffee or lunch. I have coffee and lunch with people all the time to talk through their story and what's going on in their life. We tell people, I bet you 50% of the people we talk to, we say, our program's not for you. I mean, because we're here to serve those people that are truly in halftime, not just to run numbers up or anything like that. So that's the challenge. So just know that our goal is to help people that are in this season of halftime and really find out not necessarily what's the next thing for your whole second half. That's probably a little crazy. What's the next season look like? I don't know how long I'm going to do this. Right now I know God's called me to this season in my life. And I think I have a platform and a foundation now to work from on this. So if you could help me, Ryan, I have these brochures. It's under that handout. Yeah, all these. I'll pass out some too. So this is just information on the Halftime Insitute. There's stuff in the back that'll answer some of your questions. And again, if you're interested in anything, my card's in there as well, so you can talk to me as well. But there you go, here's 5. And I think that's it. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.